Hey everyone, it's Michael Zipursky, and today I'm here with Perry Marshall. Perry, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey Perry, always great to speak with you. And for those who aren't familiar with your work, Perry is an author, a consultant, a speaker. He's well known for his books, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, several other books on Google and Facebook advertising. And you also have the Evolution 2.0 prize that you've been making a lot of waves with in certain communities. And that's a very big topic we won't go into today because I know we don't have the time because we need a lot more time for that. But really what I wanted to have you on today, Perry, and to explore with you, because I think it'll add a lot of value for people, is your latest book called Detox, Declutter, Dominate. And that contains some very powerful content for business owners. And so I want to kind of dive into some of the principles, the ideas that you and your co-author, Robert Scrobb, kind of explain in that book. Some I was very familiar with before, and some you put, a new kind of slant on or shared some stories. But before we do that, I want to ask you, because the book itself is a little bit unconventional in that it's quite short, right, from a page length perspective and the way that it's presented. Why such a short book? Why put that out and not stick with kind of the thicker, more conventional length and, quote unquote, kind of book like your previous ones?
Well, a year ago, it was 150 pages long, and I sent it to Rob, and Rob sent it back a couple weeks later. He goes, Perry, I 80/20'd your book, which means I chopped out the 80% that was only delivering 20% of the value. And he goes, it's 8,000 words now instead of 50,000 words. And then he's like, and hang on, I'll be back. And then he put together these infographics and he said, so not only did we chop out so that only the most important 20% is here, we also made it easier to consume with infographics and charts and illustrations. And I was like, thank you, sir. May I have another? Like, of course, your ego's wrapped up in this, but he helped me buy into the idea that if we made this extremely digestible and just down to the bare absolute essentials, that it would actually become a much easier, like it would get used more. It would get consumed, it would get applied. And so that's what we did. And so like I myself would never have come up with this myself, especially the way it looks with all the illustrations and everything. That's Rob. And so, yes, that's how that happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting because it's really a lot less information, but more implementation. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of people pick up books and they don't actually read the whole book. They might start it or it might plan to get to it. But what you've really done is made these concepts which are extremely powerful. So yes, it's few in page count, but the content is so compelling and so powerful that it makes up for it. So why don't we dive into some of the principles in this book? I think most of our listeners will be familiar with the concept of 80/20 and Pareto's law and principle and all that kind of stuff. But and you do talk about that in the book, but you also talk about this concept of the espresso machine, which kind of takes 80/20 to a whole other level. And so I'd love to have you start off, Perry, by just explaining what is the espresso machine concept.
So the principle of the $2,700 espresso machine says that if you manage a Starbucks and 1,000 people a week come through and buy a $5 latte, 80/20 says because 80% of the money wants to come from 20% of the customers, that one of those people will spend $2,700 on an espresso machine. So you got $5,000 from the 1,000, and then you got $2,700 from the one. So that's $7,700. And it's really, really important to point out that you didn't need to get any new customers to sell the espresso machine. It's completely from your existing customers. So you can use 80/20 to extract a lot more money out of a finite number of people. And this is incredibly important because, you deal with consultants. Most consultants are not getting thousands of sales leads, okay?
Right.
They're not, they don't have 1,000 people a month filling out a box on their email, on their website saying, oh, give me your ebook. They might, but usually a consultant's dealing with a universe of dozens or at most hundreds of people, and probably 3 or 5 or 10 or 20 existing or past clients, right? And the espresso machine is about making 50% more, 2 times, maybe even 3 times more money from an existing client list, which then, if you do any kind of paid advertising or marketing, it actually gives you more ability to go get more customers as well.
Right.
But this is true. It's almost like a law of physics. It's true of Starbucks. It's true at a grocery store. It's true of a consulting business.
Right. And what would you say for the potential application for a consultant? Is it really just expanding your thinking in terms of your typical price point? So let's say if your standard engagement was $15,000, is the exercise that you might encourage a consultant to go through, what does a $50,000 or a $150,000 engagement look like? Or would you counsel them in some other way?
Well, so the principle says that 1/5 the people will spend 4 times the money. And 1/5 of those people will spend 16 times the money of the original group. And so, it says that it's basically a law of physics that money is burning a hole in somebody's pocket, and they are going to spend it somewhere. Okay, so let's take the espresso machine idea a step further. 1 out of 10 people who buys an espresso machine might go on a Mediterranean barista cruise, or they might, I don't know, they might spend $20,000 or $30,000 on some like lavish, ridiculous, and if you go looking, you'll find some coffee experience that somebody is charging $30,000 for.
Yeah.
Right. So for a consultant, it's very typical. A consultant has like a $10,000 a month retainer or something like that. Well, for every 5 people who would hire a consultant on a $10,000 a month retainer, there's 1 that would spend $40,000 a month, and they will, and they are, or they did. So you have to, well, what would they spend 40,000 on? Well, if you want to condense it down to the simplest idea, it's sell results, not procedures. They'll pay a lot more money to get closer to whatever result is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some clients will pay us $10,000 for a report because they need to know something, but the report is only one step of some huge initiative, right?
Definitely. When you look at the concept, the principle of the espresso machine or 80/20, what do you see as the most common mistakes that people make when they try and take this idea and actually apply it in their own businesses?
Well, the first thing is, if you've never charged 10 times more or 5 times more, then your head trash is going to fight it. Like, the first thing is like, well, your sense of worthiness is under, after you've done it a couple of times, it's not going to be a big deal anymore. But literally, it's the first thing is a mindset thing. And okay, so and then for most people, this is going to some degree redefine what you do, or like what you consider to be a complete outcome, because we all have to define these boundaries of, well, okay, this is the part that's mine, and then it goes on the next step of the assembly line, and that part is the client's. But I would think of it like this: anytime anytime there's a business to business transaction, somebody's taking a risk. You know, if you sell somebody $100,000 piece of software, usually the client is making a bigger risk than just $100,000 as to, is it actually going to work?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I would ask, like, maybe going from 10,000 to 40,000 is, well, for 40,000, I actually guarantee a result, or I actually guarantee that this will work, which is going to require you to have an even clearer definition of, okay, so what conditions have to be in place before I even sell them this thing to make sure that I can actually make this guarantee. And
Yeah.
it's probably you making sure about a lot more things than you used to make sure about before.
Let's take a look at another one, another concept here. In your previous book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, you talk about the $10 an hour versus the $10,000 an hour kind of activities and sources of value. Can you, first of all, just explain that concept for those that aren't familiar with it?
Well, so let's say we're talking about a dental office, and Helen answers the phones and she makes $15 an hour. Well, most people like Helen think about money in terms of, well, could I get a raise next year? Could I get $16.50? Could I get $17.50? And people thinking about money in these little increments, but that's not how money works. Money works in like $15 an hour, $100 an hour, $1,000 an hour, $10,000 an hour. It works on I call it a power law scale. Now, most people go, okay, so why would you talk to Helen about making $10,000 an hour? Well, hold on a second. Phone rings. Hello, Wooddale Dental, please hold. And she puts somebody on hold for 2 minutes. And then she picks up again and they've left. And they called the very next dental office and they booked a $5,000, crowns or root canals or whatever. Okay, Helen, by putting them on hold, lost $5,000 in 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's $150,000 an hour, not $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And this is real. Like, nobody could argue that this doesn't happen every single day on like every main street in the world.
Yeah.
And so the time, if Helen gets with the office manager, the dentist, whoever else, and the staff works out a system to make sure nobody gets put on hold for 2 minutes, nobody gets sent to the wrong person, especially when they're about to spend $5,000. Whatever time it takes to put those systems in place is $1,000 an hour work.
Mm-hmm.
And everything in a business runs on these. It's like there's these long stretches of basically worthless, and then these little short bursts of extreme value. And this is how business actually works. But unless you train yourself to think about $10,000 an hour for 30 seconds or $100,000 an hour for a minute, you'll never catch them, and they just go by.
When you kind of really started to think or have this concept crystallized in your mind, how did you start to apply it in your own business or with your team? What stands out, or what kind of memories do you have, or what kind of comes up like, oh yeah, we did this because it was very clear?
Well, so one of the things I encourage everybody to do is email your closest 5 or 10 friends, colleagues, even like your mom, and ask them, what do you see as my unique capability? What do I do better than just about anybody else you know? And like 10 people give you these answers. If you shave these, like take all that information and you shake it down to, so how would this reduce down to like 5 sentences? I do this and this and this, and what I came up with my list, and I looked at that and I said, okay, in especially in the best hours of the day, like most of us have about 3 really good quality hours of super productivity, typically in the morning for most people. And then the rest of the day is going to be filler. We're kidding ourselves if we think that we're like hyper productive 10 hours a day. We aren't. But like, especially for that 2 to 4 hours of really peak time, I should be, whatever I'm doing should be on that list of like those 5 things. Okay. So like, Michael, you are a coach and a trainer, a marketing advisor and a strategist for consultants. And that's because of, well, from what I know of you, you're very good at isolating problems. You're very good at breaking things down. You're very good at understanding people. Like, you have your core set of things. You should be doing those things and in fact stacking those skills, like not just 1 of 5, but ideally 2, 3, 4, hopefully even 5 out of those 5 talent zones in your best hours of the day, and everything else should go away.
Yeah.
Right? So it gets done by your VA or your personal assistant, or it gets done at midnight, or it gets done at some, you could do it while you watch TV, but you don't do it then. And you have these concentrated zones. And that is incredibly important. And what this inevitably means is, if you get to any level of success, it means you are constantly expecting other people to take more and more stuff off your plate.
Yeah. I remember, Perry, when I first learned about this concept, explained in this way, in your book, and then started to kind of introduce clients to it and talk more about it. It became very powerful for so many people, because oftentimes, if you do a bit of an inventory analysis, like where are you spending all of your time? Which column are you in? Are you in the $10 an hour, the $100 an hour, $1,000? Most people would come back and go, yeah, I am doing some $10 an hour. A lot of my stuff is probably in like the $100 an hour column. I'm not doing as much stuff as I should in the $1,000, and 10,000, like my mind's never even been there. Like I never even thought that big before, right? And so what was interesting is then helping clients and people to see that, yeah, sure, there's maybe a bunch of stuff that you're spending time right now that isn't the $100 an hour or $10 an hour column. And you might initially think that that's not the best use of your time or money to try and train someone else to do those things, or money out of your pocket to support those things. But if once you see that you can create more $1,000 or $10,000 an hour type of value, then what you actually start to realize is that every hour that you spend on the $10 an hour or $100 an hour, you're actually losing money, because you could be generating significantly more. So when people can start to see that it's not an expense to bring on team members or to delegate or to build systems, it's actually an investment. And so your exercise and kind of paradigm or table for doing that, I think is a really good way for people to work through that.
Yes, if and there's a chart in the book. If you look at the $10 an hour stuff, if you understand every minute that you spend doing, like driving to the office supply store, you're losing money. And more importantly, you're losing energy, because we have finite, there's only so many problems and riddles and puzzles that you can unravel in a day.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So why are you spending your brain cells? Your brain cells is a precious resource.
Yeah. Now, if someone truly enjoys driving to the local Staples or Home Depot and going through the aisles, and somehow that gives, feeds your creative juices, all the best to you, right? But it's really about, where do you spend the limited resource that you have, which is time. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Let's talk about another principle, which is the STAR principle. And then I first learned about that reading Richard Koch's book by the same name. And I know you and Richard have a relationship, you've done, work together, all that kind of stuff. But tell us, what is the STAR principle for people who are not familiar with it?
So STAR principle is probably, it's the simplest way of describing everything that in hindsight it actually worked in my career. It was like, you realize that everything you've ever done that's actually worked fit this little pattern here. And the pattern was being number one in a growing market. And that the person who is number one in a growing market gets a disproportionate amount of the profit and the growth and the benefit and everything. And to be quite frank with you, the next person and the next person and the next person are all fighting over the scraps. This is how the world works. So okay, so what does that mean? And well, it means that if you're not number one, you carve off a slice of the market that nobody's addressing, and you be number one in that. And like this applies to every level of scale, from literally a lemonade stand to billion-dollar Coca-Cola, General Motors. Okay, so so for the individual consultant, okay, let's say that might give me pull an example of any consultant that you work with, industry, profession, go.
Yeah, there's so many, but let's just take a consultant that serves manufacturing companies and helps them with the improving their profitability through efficiency and making sure that their employees are working at high levels of productivity, and maybe they apply Kaizen or lean and all that kind of stuff.
Perfect. Okay, so let's say that you're a Kaizen consultant for manufacturing. Well, there's only like 5,000 of those. Okay, but can you niche yourself to a subset of, maybe it's a subset of Kaizen, like that's a huge topic. So there's all these little niche areas, right? To where you could be the number, I don't know what they are, but like you're the number, like there's a new emerging thing and it has something to do with big data or whatever. And like, can you be the number one person in that little slice? Or maybe you're the number one person in like some specific vertical within manufacturing. Like for about 5 years, I was the number one direct marketing and copywriting consultant in industrial networking, which is a sliver. But see, you can make a good living in a sliver of an industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, if you're I was the number one in that tiny sliver. And for the first few years of hanging on my shingle and doing that whole scary thing that all of your listeners are familiar with, it wasn't frankly that hard to make a perfectly reasonable living, make my car payment, make my mortgage, feed my kids. My wife kind of liked it. It was like, we actually have some money for the first time in our life now, right? Yeah. But are you number one in a growing market? And of course, the growing market part's important too, because if you're number one in something that was really hot in 1993, well, fine. But this is so important. And it even comes down to individual product lines. Like, you shouldn't even introduce a new product unless that product can be number one in some part of a growing market. Otherwise, why waste your time?
So I think this is a real source of challenge and frustration for many consultants and advisors and those in the professional services, because on one side, they understand, people understand the importance of niching down and creating specialization. And so this principle will really resonate. At the same time, on the other side, it's, well, by doing that, I'm limiting opportunities. If I say I'm only working with industrial automation, companies in the networking space, like, well, what about the other type of, automation companies or other types of manufacturing companies that I could help? What's your response to them? Because I know you've worked with clients in many, many different industries over the years, Perry. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'll give you an example from my own world. So about 15 years ago, I became known as the Google Ads guy. Okay. And now I understand, as a consultant, in the grand scheme of things, The best consultants are generalists. The best consultants know a lot of stuff about a lot of things, and that's the best way to have longevity. Okay, and I encourage you to do that. Like, indulge yourself and go read all the books that you think are interesting and go down the rabbit hole and get certified if that's going to help. Fine. Okay, but here's when you're trying to open doors, the best way to open a door is for people to easily pigeonhole you. And I know you don't like to be pigeonholed. Like, look, I know all this other stuff. Yeah, I know, but just get known, for big data applications of Kaizen and industrial networking or whatever the tiny little slice is. Make yourself famous. In fact, make it so anytime that subject comes up over in that little corner of the world, people will always think of you, and that will make your phone ring. Here's what would always happen when I got famous for Google is I had all these people. Well, I wrote a book and they're reading my book and everything. They would come to these workshops. They all thought that their problem was their Google ads. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes that was actually true. Okay? But most of the time, I mean, time after time after time, I'd sit down with a client and I would ask him 100 questions, and it'd be like, we've been here for 2 hours and we haven't done Google yet. Well, yeah, because that's not your real problem. It's like, I'm trying to get to your real problem. Okay, that's where you balance the generalist who's like, because Michael, would you agree? Most clients don't even know what their problem actually is.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so the typical scenario is your client thinks that this identifiable thing that you're famous for is his problem. So he comes to you and he hires you. And then you start working together and you figure out, you know what, that's not really your problem. This is your problem. If we fix this broken bone, your leg will stop hurting. They're like, okay, fix my leg. So does that kind of balance it out a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great, information. It's a great way of looking at it because it makes it more digestible for people. I mean, what I always say to clients is you're not putting this, like your sword is not going into the stone that you can never take it out again, right? This is about getting moving in the right direction. And as you start doing that by deciding on which path to take, a lot of things then become clear to you. You're able to take these hypotheses and beliefs that you have, validate them, make progress, get business going, and that business and those opportunities will create new opportunities, open new doors for you. I think that's really what you're saying through your own experience as well, and we've certainly seen that too. So some really great ideas here, Perry, for people to think about. I want to make sure that people can find out more about the book, Detox, Declutter, Dominate. I know it's available on Amazon. Anywhere else that people should go, Perry, to learn more about the book and just what you're up to these days?
Go to perrymarshall.com and scroll down, and there's a little opt-in for the 30-day street MBA. And I promise to punch you in the face from the very first email that comes in your email box. It'll really change your thinking and make your business better.
And I have to say, Perry's writing and content and just everything you put out, not only will you learn something, you'll also find it entertaining, amusing, thought-provoking. Perry's very good at that. So Perry, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.